Josh? What do we do now? What are we supposed to do now?
I think we got to start talking.
We got to start talking. Oh, yeah, that's right. Hey, welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I'm Representative Gary Hopper. This is Joshua Solomon. Excuse me. Now, we have Max Abramson's coming on. Everybody's met him before, but we have two cool guests today because I was on Facebook, and everybody knows the Trump rallies tomorrow. And Libby and her husband Brian have been to how many?
55.
55 Trump rallies. She's one of his biggest fans, and he's one of her biggest fans, I guess, or is just I don't know.
This is Brian's first rally.
Oh, it's his first rally. Yeah. Oh, I thought he went to him with you.
No, he lets me go.
No, he just lets you go.
All on my own.
So, okay, you've been to all the rallies. I got some good questions for you, Libby.
Okay.
Have you missed any?
Oh, yeah, of course. A lot of them were like too far away. I used to come to all the New Hampshire, Pennsylvania. I live in Connecticut, so anything within driving distance. But then, after President Trump got elected, they got further and further away, so I'd have to, and the furthest, I drove 1,000 miles one way to Evansville once.
You're driving to all these?
Yeah.
She drove to them all except for one.
And I became a front row Joe, so I have friends I stay with along the way.
I know a guy who's not using his plane anymore.
Oh, yeah, and I got people, man. I got people.
Did he hang himself?
Oh, yeah.
Allegedly hung himself.
I wouldn't go on that plane. Yuck.
Of course, you want to clean it out first a little bit, but if you sanitize it a slight bit.
Yeah.
Anyway, so when I have a question for you. So when we were going through the 2016 election, there was allegedly, on the news they made it look like there were Trump people causing trouble at rallies. What did you actually see versus what was in the news?
Okay, the first time I know, and you guys know this well.
You got to be a little bit closer to the mic.
Okay, the first time I really noticed it was, and you guys would know this well, the Manchester Arena. It was, I think, January, February in 2016, before President Trump got elected, and his whole family was here with him. Melania was here. And this guy, I was in the section just away from the stage to the right. If President Trump was facing us, it would be to the right, the bleachers there. And this guy, he started, when our lady came out, our first lady came out, he started making terrible comments about her and the president. And this other guy, and he was saying, and we started pointing at him, and they ran over and they grabbed him. And as they were carrying him out, he said something to this older gentleman. The older gentleman suckered him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he said something to the guy. So that was the first time. But this guy,
instigation.
This guy, you wouldn't believe, like, it just was totally, it was just terrible. He deserved it, as far as I'm concerned.
That's what I say. He was instigating.
Yeah, yeah, and it was against a woman. It was against a lady. He wasn't saying things against another man. He was saying, yeah.
Unfortunately, from my experience with dealing with the media comes in and they want some sort of controversy, they want some conflict, and to some extent they'll stoke it, and that's what they wanted. They wanted that soundbite, they wanted that video clip, and they got it, right? There was
something as the guy was leaving, the older man in him, their comments. He said something to the older man again, and this guy is a vet. There was something. I'm sure you guys know. There was something said, and the guy. It wasn't like as the guy was going out. It wasn't just a last minute. You know, the guy said something to the older guy, and it was boom. There were words, and he suckered him.
The older guy did?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I think it was good too. So that was, but I don't see. I'm up front. I'm in line. I'm in first. I wait all night with my fellow front row Joes. I travel to get there, and we hear of stuff that goes on outside after we're in. We're so heavily
right. You're
Secret
inside.
Service.
You're inside the security perimeter, and
yes.
and that nonsense mostly takes place outdoors.
Yeah, it happens, and we see the instigators when we're inside, and they just come out of any. I saw it at the RNC. I was a friend of the New Hampshire GOP for the RNC in Cleveland. and there was media, and the area I was in, the media were like over there. You could see them well. This girl with doing media, doing filming of the RNC, jumped on the area, and she had this. She unfurled this banner, handmade, and jumped up on this thing and tried to jump off. She tried to commit suicide. She was trying to jump into the crowd, screaming against how she's in there with media. I don't know which newspaper. Did anyone ever talk about that? Did anyone ever tell you what newspaper or
Did
what?
somebody grab her before she
That,
did?
yeah. Pinkerton was there from Scotland. You know, they had more than just our guys. They did grab her.
Wow.
They got her off that thing. She was on this thing, and she was trying to jump over, and she was. But no one ever. And when who was she with? Do we know? Was she with CNN? You know what I mean? No one ever. I remember her. And then I go to Trump Tower a lot, and I was there once before too. This is in was he already a president by then? And this girl, like Trump Tower, has these escalators. You can go up to the 3rd floor. And up by Starbucks, which is the 2nd floor, she was up at the 3rd floor and unfurled this nasty. And they ran over and got her down, but she was hanging over with this banner. You know what I mean? And they went over to grab her and get her out of there. It's like, it's crazy. It's
I
just,
know what
I've
you're
seen.
talking about. We were just there.
Yeah,
I know where you're at.
yeah. And you think it's not us that are starting it. We try, if people come to us when we're in line, we try to talk them into seeing it our way. We try to get them to,
Listen.
be pro-Trump. And I've had discussions. And in Pennsylvania, when I drove home alone, I had all the Trump stickers after that rally. And I went into a diner, and this guy started talking to me and how much he hated Trump. And I said, well, how do you think, he was a vet. I said, how do you think about the vet? And well, I said, how do you think about all these illegals coming in? And he agreed with that point. I said, this is back in 2016. I said, how do you feel about ISIS? Oh, yeah, I said, do you see all the things you said yes to? I said, they're all Trump's messages. None of that belongs to Hillary. I said, you got to rethink things.
Yeah.
So it's just.
When you break it down logically, I find, if you take one step at a time, one issue at a time, break it down, if you've got a captive audience, if you've got someone who's willing to go back and forth with you, very seldom do they not come to our position, but they do so in such a roundabout manner that they still think they're on the other side. I don't know.
I think a lot of the issue isn't Trump's positions. Most of them, I think most Americans agree with. Most Americans do not believe that people from other countries should be able to enter the country illegally and then receive medical treatment, benefits, welfare, etc., etc. Very, very few Americans believe in that. The problem is that Trump has said accurately that a good percentage of the people coming over here illegally have raped people on the way. They're trafficking children. They're bringing over drugs. Some are MS-13, which are animals. So he says all these things that are accurate, but the news media takes them out of context and tries to give the impression that Trump hates people from South America, which is not the case. He hates people coming here illegally.
Yeah, and that's a position that Obama held, a position that Hillary held, a position that Bill held for the longest time. But the only reason they're making an issue out of it is so that conservatives don't win, right? They want to take the subject back, and they don't want us to chalk up a win, and we will chalk up a win with this.
The whole thing is still
Right.
they're just mad because Hillary lost.
Exactly.
Period. The end of
It's
the
all
story.
about. It doesn't
all-
matter what the subject matter is,
Right.
as long as we can stop them from having a win.
Yeah, if you look at the last few years, and you folks have seen a few elections before. Do you ever remember any election where after the election, somebody tried to forcibly bribe, persuade, or threaten electors for the Electoral College to change their votes.
No.
I am.
Ever?
No.
My
you
church.
ever remember that? You've
No.
you've seen.
I've been a registered Republican for over 40 years.
Have you ever
Yeah.
seen that happen?
No.
My church, our minister, he was retiring and a new minister was coming in. And they were friends of ours. And of course, the new minister coming into became a very close friend of ours. And they were told as he retired not to come to church for a couple of months, just till the new minister comes in and gains the footing and the, the friendship, the comradeship of the people, and then come back. And so they didn't come.
Transition
Yeah,
of
so the
power.
transition would be, and then they didn't come to the 11 o'clock service. They went to the 7:30, which is much smaller, or whatever. But they weren't in the forefront there. And then as Luke became more, then they came back and got more involved. But they were actually asked not to, and they agreed. That's what you do with people. If you care about your congregation, if you care about your country, that's what you do. You step back.
Right.
And that's what these people are doing. And I'm telling you, this is a big, big moment for America, this next election. Our president, I was at the rallies, has said, don't become complacent. Get out there and vote for midterms. And we didn't. And look what's happened to this country over the last 2 years.
Look
And
what
if we
happened in
if we don't
Connecticut.
stand up now, we're going to lose this country. You're going to lose your country, America. Everybody got to get out there.
In
Yep.
the midterms in Connecticut, I think there's approximately 180,000 registered voters for the midterms that were supposed to come out. Only 40,000, I was told, came out, which is
Yeah,
like nothing.
this is part of the manipulation by the
Well,
media. The media does put out polls
Yeah.
specifically to
They're good at it.
either prevent you from showing up or make you show up,
Or discourage.
or discourage you.
Yeah.
And it can go both ways. They can put out a poll that says that the liberals are so far ahead, don't even bother showing up.
Right.
Right, but then they can also do the other. They can go backwards. Again, this is the whole complacency thing. Oh well, it looks like the conservatives are a lock. So, if
Why
you're
bother?
busy, you don't have to show up, right? So I mean, it goes both ways.
Well, I think
and which way they're playing it this season, who knows?
I think we did show up, come to think of it. I think there was a lot of fraudulent voting.
there
Because
is
once
that.
a Trumpster, always a Trumpster. I think there was so much fraud going on in the midterms. I really
Oh,
do.
there has to be, I'm not saying it's millions and millions and millions, but there's got to be some kind of a number out there.
There's an element
and they
of that,
know what
and,
it is.
and we actually have a group here in New Hampshire that stays on top of it and does their best. That's the
Taxpayers.
New Hampshire taxpayers. Is Ed still head that up?
Yeah, Ed's still working on
Yeah,
it.
he's a hawk on that. We try to stay ahead of it here in New Hampshire. But yeah, it does happen, and we've got evidence of it. It's a matter of
you need
publicizing
ID
that
here in
episode.
New Hampshire to vote?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes.
yeah.
But I think it really happened in New Hampshire because I was here at all your rallies. When I found out that President Trump didn't take New Hampshire, I said, that's not true. And it was only 2,500 votes that you lost. That's all lies. I was here. And he didn't want to recount because he'd already won. It was like water under the bridge. But he should have had the recount. I heard people told me there was buses pulling in from Boston going in to vote here in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
It was all, because I know how you guys think and feel. I've been to all your, and it's like Pennsylvania. They wouldn't call Pennsylvania. And I was at like 8 or 10 rallies in Pennsylvania. And we're all waiting that night. I said, he has Pennsylvania. How can you tell me he doesn't have Pennsylvania? And finally they called it. I knew by the rallies. I knew by the amount of people that were there. I knew by the feeling in the auditorium. It's just so that's another big example, right? Like they wouldn't call Pennsylvania. He won Pennsylvania hours before.
They do that. They do that every year. They'll refuse to call a state for hours and
Fox
hours,
will call
hoping.
it when they say it, though.
Yeah, exactly. Or they'll
And
call
or-
they'll call it the wrong way, hoping that voters in the
Don't
other
go.
time zones don't
Yeah.
go.
Well, look what happened in Florida over there. Everybody up in the Panhandle, they thought it was time. They all went home and everything else,
Right,
you know?
the whole because of Panhandle
Yeah.
in a different time zone.
That's right. You're an hour off. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a 2018 election, I think was, so we had, this is the weird thing. So we had the election 2016, and if you look at the reaction of the media and the Democrats, Honestly, I believe they think they had it bought. They thought they had enough corrupt votes that they were in.
Right.
And that's why they were shocked when they lost. And so the first thing they did is ask for a recount, and they had to get the Green Party to ask for a recount because of all the fuss they made about Trump saying, will you accept the results of the vote? So they made that big stink in the debates, and then so they had to get the lady that ran as a Green Party to ask for the recount, and they paid her off. They did a recount, and it went to Detroit, and there was so much corruption in favor of Hillary, they called that off. So the recount thing wasn't working out for them.
That's right. They stopped.
So they
that.
did the recount. Then they went after the electors, and then they made this phony. They used the phony Russian dossier, paid for by
Still
Clinton.
going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Paid for by Clinton to give the impression to the American people that Trump was in cahoots with the Russians to take the election, which is funny because we already knew Hillary had already bought her primary. She bought the Democrat primary,
So we have
and
plenty of
somehow we are supposed to believe that Trump had the connections to buy the general election. If anybody bought the election, it would have been Hillary. She just didn't pay enough. So they come up with this phony story. So by the time we get to 2018, the American people have been fed a load of crap for 2 years about Russian collusion.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what tainted, because if the United States House, 60 members of the United States House, Republican incumbents, did not go for re-election because they believed that they were going to lose, they would have won. They would have won, and we would have still had control of the House if they didn't
Because
fall.
of the collusion. I can tell you something
it
else
was the
about
investigation.
President Trump and his deal with North Korea. That would have worked out. But when he went over there, they were going crazy here about collusion, delusion. Would you sign a deal with the President of the United States when, if he goes home, he's going to get impeached? I think the Democrats ruined that. And we're talking about peace, and we're talking about nukes and North Korea. They ruined that with all their
It was intentional. The
Of course it
investigation
was.
was all about keeping this doubt in everyone's mind, including longtime Republicans and
Yeah.
and friends
Mitt
in Washington
Romney.
D.C.
You're talking
Yeah.
about rhinos.
The investigation
Yeah, Paul
was
Ryan.
was the intent there was to create that disturbance so that there was mistrust. And now that the investigation's over, we see there's a lot more support here, and some of the folks, like you said, who either didn't run or resigned thinking that they were going to lose, probably made a mistake.
They did, because they're selfish jerks, and all they cared about was maintaining their position in the House and leadership. And they knew that if they lost, all of a sudden they don't get their fancy office and stuff. So people who theoretically ran to serve the people were obviously in there to serve themselves. So we had that Russian collusion. Now that it's over, now they're going with the
Kavanaugh.
No, now they're going saying he's racist, and if that's not working anymore, so now they're calling him a white supremacist. And I don't know about you guys, I've been around a long time. I have never met a white supremacist. I've never met one. I've met one skinhead, but he was a skinhead because he was in prison too long, and it was a survival technique. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I don't know about this. I'll tell you, I did some research, right? Because they're trying to make the news media is trying to make it look like there's all these white supremacists and members of the KKK. During the 20s and 30s, and I might have this number a little bit wrong, there were roughly 3 or 30 million members of the Ku Klux Klan. Right? Right now in the United States, there's roughly 5,000. That's like 1,000 per state. It's nothing.
Yeah, and it was
They don't.
the Democrats. It was started by Democrats also.
What's that?
It's called The Joy of Hatred. Do you see that article?
No, I can't read that quick. You can read it to us.
The Joy of Hatred was an article written after the Greensville rally with the chant. I was there for that. I was right up in front. And
Yeah.
there was photos taken. And then Jamil Bowie came out with this article. It's a New York op about the joy of hatred, how we're all supremacists. It's reminiscent of Hitler. Then he goes on to talk about lynching and how in the old days when people would go to but he has us Trumpsters at the rally. He has us on the as the main photo of this op.
Yeah, it's really
It's
the only
like-
Guess who's
it's the
front
only
and center?
avenue they have.
Oh, you were front and center. I couldn't see. Let me see it again. I'll have to post that on Facebook.
I don't know.
They're absolutely unable.
Oh, no kidding. So
to-
he's using your picture as a white supremacist.
Yeah, and I was born in Newfoundland, Canada. I'm the least racist person I know. We don't know how to be racist in Newfoundland. That's not what we're about,
Right.
you know?
It's all that they have. They cannot have an intelligent discussion with us on actual issues. They cannot win that debate. Period. And it's a resort to name calling. So
But and now this new movie
It's-
that just,
that
thank
they
God,
just canceled?
our
Yeah.
president, because
Yeah.
of his comments, thank God, he has protected us all by stopping that movie. Because pictures like this and then
your
that
movie is Hollywood fantasy. It's
It's not
liberal
fantasy.
Yeah, but-
It's people
Oh,
that
no,
are
no,
going to say,
that's-
I'm going to go
that-
on this hunt.
that
And
is-
I
wait,
think
wait,
the
that is
trailer's
their
already
fantasy.
out there.
Too many
Okay,
talking.
Just a second.
sorry.
The audience may not know about the movie.
Oh.
We're all kind of, into it. So
Okay.
okay. So
Sorry.
Hollywood just was just coming out with a movie to be released, I think, in a month or so, called The Hunt. And The Hunt was a movie, a liberal neurotic fantasy about liberals hunting down Trump supporters or deplorables, quote unquote. And that was going to be the crux to the movie is these ultra liberals. I don't know how they were going to get guns because they're afraid of them. But theoretically, some of them somehow overcame their fear of guns, learned how to shoot, and using them to hunt down Republicans and conservatives and Trump supporters.
Again, it
It's
just
a
goes
wicked,
to show you,
horrible.
It's a liberal fantasy, and the ones stoking violence and hate.
Hollywood.
That's them. We don't see this.
Where's Walt Disney when you need him,
No, I mean, if you had a if you had a conservative filmmaker do a movie about hunting down and killing democratic socialists,
Never.
they would go ballistic.
Yeah.
I don't think Weinstein would fund that movie.
No. But yeah, it's like Josh says. Can you name an issue that the Democrats can win on? They can't win on immigration. They can't possibly win on immigration. If you saw the Democratic debate, the moderator says, "Which one of you would support health care for illegal aliens?"
Free
and they all
healthcare.
They
raise
all
their
raised
hand,
their hand.
right?
Yeah.
So, with that kind of platform, if you're running against Trump, you can't possibly win. You can't possibly win on immigration, trade. What are the big issues that people care about? National health care. Nobody really wants national health care. That would ruin the health care system. You
The
just
abortion issue.
the abortion.
9 month
Yeah,
abortions
kids coming out
now.
alive.
Is it
and,
Maryland
what do we do now?
and New York?
Right.
Yeah, the governor of Maryland on TV talking about, well, after they're born, then the mother and dad
Yeah.
have to
Figure it out.
decide whether or not to let it
They
live or
want to
not.
keep. Yeah, they want to keep them or not.
So, and that's actually to punctuate how perverse the media is. That was a very good case, because the media came out and they were showing the legislature and the governor of New York, celebrating and screaming hooray when they okayed a bill to kill children up to the point of birth. So a child that's been carried in the mother's womb for 8.5 months would be is now legally murdered in New York, and that what was it? Virginia was the governor.
I think it's Virginia. Yeah.
Virginia, and it was the same story in Virginia, so that there's this all these news stories, and the left realized this wasn't going well for them. So then they came up with all these stories about the governor and blackface and all this
Oh,
other
yeah,
crap,
so
and
that-
and
yeah.
pushed that to the back burner of the news cycle.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah, there's,
that's what that was all about.
I hear there's
Bait
quite a
and
few
switch.
Planned Parenthoods that have closed too.
Yeah.
I
Because of
think-
the movie that came out.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What was the name of the movie? About Planned Parenthood. Even the lady who was in the movie, I guess she was one of the ex-directors.
Oh
for
yes,
Planned
yes,
Parenthood
yes.
And everything else, because she turned a leaf and she says this is awful now, So she put it out there. So,
And she's a wonderful lady. She went into Planned Parenthood, wide-eyed and believing, every woman has a right to choose, until she went into Planned Parenthood and they asked her to help assist in an abortion.
That's right. Yeah.
And it was like, wow.
Yeah, some of the doctors was on it. He said the same thing. He said, after a while, he said, you're looking in there. He says, and it's body parts that you're ripping out. And he says, one day, he said, I just stopped. And then I guess he might have been. I think he was on the film also. And so.
Yeah. So
terrible.
they're losing on that issue. They're losing on what other issues do we got that people care about? But basically, the Democrats don't have any issues.
Free education, all this free education, free.
Yeah, well, they want to
They
do
keep saying they're
away
gonna
with the
yeah.
$1.3 trillion
Forgiveness.
debt for all the student loans. Here, we'll just do away with it.
So yeah, which
Well, that teaches them a fundamental, liberal,
The parents
liberal
don't teach their
policy,
kids
and that
anything
is
anymore.
you enter into an agreement to repay what you've borrowed, and then you don't have to pay it back. That's a fundamental liberal concept.
Yeah,
Is that you
I
don't
was
have to
sitting
be
in the mall one
responsible
day.
Yeah, and if you
for
got
what
the money,
you've
you can
promised to
pay
do.
for any kind of education you want. Like now they all got caught,
Right.
So
I was sitting in the mall one day and I overheard these girls talking. Why should they just keep their house? They're old now. They don't need their house. They should just give it to us. I've never owned a house, and I'll have a chance to have a house. Like that's what I was supposed to do with my house, right?
yeah, you work all your
Yeah,
life for your
yeah.
house, supposed to give it to somebody that doesn't want to work
but
for it.
Medicare will take it if I have to go to a home and I don't have enough money to finance my. That's true. They do take my home, but where does that? And who do I leave it to? Do I leave it to my church? They're just gonna, you know what I mean? What do you do? I leave it to the animal foundations. It's like it's.
NRA.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't think of that. Okay. My husband's. Yeah. That,
Now she's got a direction
Yeah,
to go,
now I have a
Gary.
way.
Thanks,
I'm
Gary.
here to help. I'm here to help. That's okay. So anyway, tomorrow, if you ever get a chance to talk to Trump, I know I believe he's playing the game. So in New Hampshire, we've done a lot of talk on this show and other shows and in the legislature about red flag laws. So for the audience, a red flag law is Libby's acting kind of crazy, and her neighbor calls, says, Libby's acting weird. I don't know what's going on over there. The cops show up at her house and she shows up at the door half in the bag because she's been drinking, which a lot of people do. Oh, welcome, Max. Representative Max Abramson's here with us.
Ryan DePiero.
This is Libby.
Hi, Libby.
You're just in time. So, red flag law. So somebody calls, the neighbor calls to, and says, I'm worried about Libby. They show up. She's been drinking because it's Saturday afternoon. A lot of people are drinking, watching, whatever. So she shows up a little bit tipsy to the door, talks to the cop. The cop says, yeah, I guess she is a little bit off. Maybe we should do something. They come. The next thing you know, they get an order from the judge, and the judge comes down. They take all their guns away.
See, I'm talking to a guy yesterday.
Yeah.
He's got a house in New Hampshire,
Yeah.
and he got a house in Connecticut, with one of my friends down there. And we were talking about this yesterday. He said that they can come right into your house without a warrant, and I said, that'll never happen. So, maybe not yet, but it's not going to happen yet with this red flag. I said, you're going to have to still get a warrant.
Well, yes, but the thing is the whole premise is that Libby is now guilty, and she has to go to court to prove
That I'm innocent.
that she's innocent,
You
which
can
is the complete flip
You
Yeah.
can
Of
say
Duke-
that about anybody walking down the
Right.
street. I mean,
Exactly.
I
And
can
that's
just
what the
point at
warrant
somebody
will
and
be
go,
based
he
on.
just threatened me.
The,
And
the
call
warrant will
cops
be
and
based
say,
on
they can take him
anyone
away.
who has anything to say.
Yeah.
right?
Just doesn't like me?
And it
Yeah.
extends.
Yeah, that's what
it's-
red flag does.
It's a horrendous concept. So this fella just released a whole bunch of internal documents from Google about Google and the way that they manipulate searches, they manipulate thought and whatnot. And after he did a first release a few weeks ago, the upper management in Google figured out who it was, and they started harassing him for it. And one of the ways that they harassed him was he's sitting at home minding his own business, and all of a sudden a SWAT team shows up at his door to do a mental health welfare check.
Oh,
right?
God.
And right
People
there,
at Google did it to him?
yeah. So
He
right
reworks
there, you know, a mental health welfare check gives everybody the ability to knock down your door and decide whether or not they want to take something out of your house. And if you add red flag laws to that, you've got multiple ways of infringing on people's Second Amendment rights or Fourth Amendment rights. I mean, we can go right down the list of Bill of Rights that they're just taking away from us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know Trump has hinted to the idea that he might consider it. But I know that if the United States Congress and Trump vote for a red flag law, he is not going to win New Hampshire in 2020.
I'll guarantee he doesn't go for it. I think he's just kind of like saying that at the moment a little bit, but I think he'll just he'll push it off. It won't happen.
I thought it was about sterner and deeper background checks.
That's a different bill.
Yeah, it's a separate
And
subject that is discussing.
that is also a BS story in the news. Deeper background checks. Right now, if I wanted to buy a handgun off Josh, I can buy a handgun off Josh without a background check. Josh can do that because he knows me. It's somebody known to him. I've known you for how many years?
15.
15, ever since we tried to take Judge Souter's house. So, talk about red flags. So I've known him for 15 years. I know he's a good guy. He thinks I might be okay. But he can sell me a gun, or I can sell a gun or give a gun to my kid. They say there's a gun show loophole. There's going to be a gun show. Do you remember what the date is? There's going to be a gun show in New Hampshire in the next couple of weeks.
Excuse me, if he were to sell you a gun,
Say that again?
because he's known you for 15 years,
Yeah.
so he vouches for you and he thinks it's okay to sell you a gun.
Yeah.
If you were to do something with this gun, does any responsibility go back to him?
No, not unless he had, like, in other words, if he saw me, if I went over to his house to shoot up heroin before I bought the gun, yes, he could probably be sued.
Right. So the idea here is that I've known this person. He's a family member. He's
I'm a family member?
Someone that I've known
That's
for
a step
15
up.
years. It's an or situation here,
okay,
Gary.
sorry.
And to my best knowledge, he's perfectly fine, right? I can show that I've known Gary for quite a long time. I've known he's a state rep. He's a respectable individual, and that's why I can still sell him a firearm. And but if it can be shown that I knew beforehand
Those other
that
things.
he
Yeah.
was shooting up drugs, selling drugs, or just had a knockdown, drag-out fight with his wife last night. If I'm aware of that situation, that's when I can't do it. That's when I will be held responsible for that.
Right. But the media talks about the loophole, gun show loophole. There's a gun show in New Hampshire. I will challenge any viewer to go and try to buy a gun at that gun show without a background check. All of the people selling guns at that gun show, all the tables, are federally licensed dealers, and they all have to go through. They have to go through a background check before they can sell you a gun. So the gun show loophole is a myth. It's something they talk about, but it doesn't exist. So the only thing that they're trying to regulate is the private sale of firearms.
But one of the things that they're trying to get into on that, and it's that creeping, that next step into it. So there was a fella, I believe it was was in the Midwest. It was in either Indiana or Illinois, one of the states that has really strict firearms laws. And this just happened like a month ago. So a fella had to defend himself. He was 60 years old, or in his 60s. He grabbed a firearm that was in his home. He used it to defend his home. He was not charged with using the firearm or the death of the intruder, who was himself armed. He wasn't charged with that as a crime. He's perfectly fine with the self-defense. But he was charged with being in the possession of a firearm that wasn't registered to him. What had happened, it was his father's firearm. When his father died, he inherited everything. He inherited several firearms, and that's what he had in his home. It was simply passed down from one family member to another, and because he didn't have it registered under his name, he's now got a federal firearms case that he has to defend himself against, when it was perfectly clear that he needed to defend himself. Had he not defended himself, he'd be dead.
Well, then he wouldn't
So
be
someone
in
comes
trouble.
to my house and I use my husband's gun, who is licensed. And
It depends
happen
on
to
the
be there.
state and their laws. If you're
And
not
someone
allowed
comes
in this
in and
state to pass down a firearm or have a family member share a firearm with you, then
I
you're in
deny it.
trouble.
Well, what am I going to do? Get killed?
Well, that's the point
Well, if I use
where we
the lamp,
conservatives
I'd be
decide
okay,
that
right?
life is
Yeah, if you
better
use the
than.
lamp, you're
If I
good.
use the
Yeah.
lamp pipe. But that's another thing. They're doing all these I'm wondering about these firearm laws, right? And all these controls. What about an axe or a hammer or
That's
a
fine.
knife?
That's fine. Actually,
As long as you don't call it an assault axe or an assault hammer, as long as it's just a regular
As long
hammer.
as
Or
or
a
a
baseball
regular-
as, lo-
bat. That's
as-
okay,
as long
right?
as you don't have a bayonet lug on the baseball bat.
Even a machete. You know?
I like axes. So
Oh, no, you don't want to go there,
I'm
Libby.
into axes.
She had a nickname years ago, Lizzie Borden.
But they're not. I mean, if all this goes to take place, they're going to start regulating Home Depot. If you go to buy whatever could be used as a weapon,
Well,
right?
that's actually
that's
true.
the next step, isn't
Well,
it?
the thing is,
It is. You can see that in the
Yeah.
UK, it's starting to regulate knives.
And we're not good with knives.
Yeah.
We're not,
Steak
you know.
knives.
What are you
Are
going
a
to
problem.
regulate the cars on the street too, and they decide to run through a crowd? You know, it's
it's all stupid.
yeah.
It's about control. Max, you came all this way. What do you got to say?
Canada, Britain, and Australia had either gun buyback programs or strict gun control laws that they came up with, and all three in the mid 1990s, all three, their homicide rates and their crime rates were going down at first. As soon as they enacted strict gun control laws, they either plateaued or crime started going back up. Then they started letting people buy firearms again. Private ownership of firearms and other knives and other weapons started going back up, and then the homicide rates started going back down. We see the same thing every time: gun prohibition, alcohol prohibition, marijuana prohibition. Anytime you make something illegal, you really can't stop an object. If somebody wants to grab a bunch of pieces of paper or a microphone, they're just going to grab it. Use anything as a weapon.
You've increased the motivation of the criminal element of
And you
society.
maintain an illegal black market drug
they
traffic.
see-
we gotta
Victims,
start the.
Gun
they
prohibition,
see,
same thing.
yeah.
We gotta have a gun law like they do in that little town in Georgia over there. Remember years ago?
Kennesaw,
Kennesaw,
Georgia.
Yeah, there you go.
It's
Everybody.
Kennesaw, Georgia.
I don't think it's
Yep.
actually written on the books because I
No,
read
it is. It
It
is.
is.
Yeah. So
and there's no crime.
I have a
'Cause
family
every
member
homeowner owns a gun.
who was a professor at Kennesaw State College at the
Yeah.
time. Is my stepfather, Michael Swinford, at the time. The law went in the books. It was a town statute, a town ordinance, and
Early
it went on
80s.
the books. It was a late 80s, I think, somewhere in there.
Whatever.
But
so.
what happened was Kennesaw had this issue of home invasions and home burglaries, and folks were being victimized in their homes, and so the town council or the selectmen or whatever they have for a form of government there created this ordinance, and they made a really big deal about it on television and everything. They had this little old 90-year-old woman in the gun store buying her gun, and the number and basically required all head of household, not everyone, but all head of household, to own a firearm and be trained in self-defense. And the burglary rate in Kennesaw, Georgia, went down to 0.
Yeah.
in almost no time, within a year or so.
Everybody carried, there'd be no.
But it's
there'd be no
it's
killings.
statistically, as Max said, time and time again, we see the same result.
Yeah.
When you're empowered to protect your own property and your own life,
I gotta remember,
crime
but
goes
I think
down.
it was at that same time, there was a town, and I can't remember if it was Ohio, Illinois, that they abolished every homeowner could not have a gun. It was at that exact same time, and everything else, and the crime rate in that town skyrocketed.
Oh, Josh and I had a conversation with a lawyer, and he was talking about defending criminals in Massachusetts. And what the criminals in Massachusetts do is if they live in, say, Worcester, they'll go to like Acton or something like that to do their breaking and entering. And so this lawyer asked a few of them, well, why don't you just, New Hampshire's closer, why don't you go to New Hampshire? They said, we're not about to go to New Hampshire, we'll get shot. Right? So the criminals know what where the possibilities, like we've had some break-ins in Ware, but it turns out it was somebody local who knew whose house he was breaking into.
All right.
So it wasn't like a random act of going into a house and Ware, which would get most people killed. So yeah, it's the same thing with that shooting in Texas. If
The guy
all,
drove all the way across the state.
all you need to do is have one person in that mall with a gun, and that would have been stopped after a few rounds.
I
That's
was
right.
amazed
What
that
was it
Texas
they said?
didn't.
Yeah,
have
no,
everybody
it was
in
a
Texas
safe
is
zone.
armed.
the
Gun-free
the
zone.
duration of a
How
mass
about-
Wait,
shooting.
that
It was a gun-free zone from what I was
Yeah.
told. But I thought that's what I read.
really?
Yes.
Most
I didn't know that.
I
I think the statistics up to the high 80s. Most mass shootings occur in gun-free zones, but
think
yeah,
that's
the duration of a mass shooting and the number of people killed depends directly on the arrival of a second gun.
Yeah, Sandy Hook's
Right?
only
That's
a
exactly what has to happen.
20
There
minute,
needs to
30-minute
be
ride from us.
someone
you know?
else defending themselves.
So you throw somebody armed, arm everybody, arm all the teachers. So
Hey, Matt, I don't know how much time we got. Let me check. This is rude, but oh yeah, we got time. Max, can you quickly go over the governor's vetoes on the guns? Because this is pretty great. Because I didn't know what our governor was going to do, because there was a massive amount of pressure on him by liberals to pass 3 different gun bills that were on his desk this past week. And he vetoed all 3 of them.
Wow.
It would have been wicked easy. He had enough cover if he wanted to sign any of them, but he didn't. He vetoed all 3. I thought that was pretty courageous, considering, because it's right after that stupid shooting in Texas. And so anyway,
Ohio.
I'm not sure I went through the whole veto list, but I'm not sure which of the 3 bill numbers are, but one is a waiting period. The red flag law, I thought, was tabled or retained until next year.
yeah, that's retained to next year, but that's not one of the ones. No.
So I forget what's the bill number for the waiting period, but that when you would go into a gun store, even if your life is in danger, your home's just been broken into frequently. If your home's broken into one night, there's a very good chance within the next day or 2 it's going to be broken into again. We see on burglaries and violent crimes that when somebody or a gang member or a group of criminals attacks you, they attack you again right afterwards. So this is actually one of the worst. It seems harmless, but we already have instant background checks in this country. When you go in to buy a gun, it takes 1 or 2 minutes for them to run the system and check your name. They do have some false positives and false negatives. So there's nothing benefited from a waiting period, and yet it was just something that they came up with. There were a whole bunch of direct gun control laws that they came up with. Democrats came up with this session, and there were a whole bunch of indirect gun control laws that actually came through my committee, CACR 4 and CACR 8. That were either voted down or were retained. CACR 4 is retained until next year also. But there are all these different backdoors to gun control that they've come up with. Another one was like a victim's law, a way that someone could say that they're a victim and just disarm their neighbor or something like
Right.
that.
So that's a red flag.
That's, yeah, basically a red
What do you
flag.
mean?
Yeah, there's several
Say they're a victim.
ways
They
of-
could say, "Oh, my
enacting it.
neighbor's dangerous," or "I was domestic violence somehow. I was over at his place at a barbecue and he poked me in the eye," or something. They literally say anything
They
just
could
by
lie,
saying
just
anything.
hearsay.
Oh, of
There's
course.
no proof. No, like they did with Kavanaugh.
But that
Same
happens.
thing.
But that happens. That happens even in civil and criminal courts.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, juries are not saying not guilty. When you really need to say not guilty, especially in self-defense cases, you need to say not guilty unless the evidence is just, absolutely
Overwhelming.
proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Can't be any lawful, rational explanation left. You really have to be convinced before you convict someone, especially in a defense of others cases or a defense of premises case. But he did veto the 3 of those, and he vetoed. I don't know what the total was. Some
Lot.
really large number of bills. It's a record number of bills that have been vetoed this section. So it's going to take a couple days to get through all the veto messages.
Yeah, because
September
we
18th.
we talked earlier about the 2018 election, because of the this huge cloud nationwide about Trump colluding with the Russians. The 2018 election, a lot of Republicans stayed home because they were upset because they believed CNN and MSNBC and the national propaganda radio. They start to buy into it because they keep hearing it all the time, and they say, well, I can't vote for that, and they stay home. And that's what you end up with. You end up with a democratically controlled House and a democratically controlled Senate in New Hampshire. And for the first time ever, there was actually a positive vote on an income tax in the New Hampshire House. And obviously there's 3 gun bills that made it through the House and the Senate and ended up on the governor's desk.
There were, 4 or 5 different state income tax bills going through. There was one that just came up, what's his name? Spillane. Jim Spillane had like a cell phone texting bill, and one of the Democrats tried to amend that bill in the Senate to turn it into a state income tax bill. There's a couple other bills where they pulled stuff like that, but there were 2. There was also a House state income tax bill and a Senate state income tax bill. And the Democrats every year say, "Oh no, we'll never vote for state income tax." 98% of your Democrat legislators voted for at least one of those state income tax bills. 98% of them. So there are only
And they can't
4 or 5?
say that during their campaigns, or they'll never get elected. At
Right.
least not in New Hampshire.
Yeah, yeah. They
Well,
always
anyways.
claim that they're not in favor of as far as I remember, every Democrat that has pledged to support an income or sales tax has got trounced in general elections. So they know it's not a winning issue, but as soon as they gain power, that's what they try to
turn it
do.
around, yeah.
So it's
I don't know why they would all come out and say all illegals can have free health care. Why do they think that?
So Obamacare increased healthcare costs by like 116%. You had, was it 27 million or 30 million people that lost their healthcare. You had tens of millions more where the quality of healthcare went down, their out-of-pocket costs went up, you no longer have choice of doctors and clinics. And all these terrible things happened. And Medicare, under the doc fix, they cut Medicare. Democrats cut Medicare benefits on top of that, so you can't choose your doctor. Some older folks can't choose their doctor. And now the penalty is they hit you and me with a $700 and some odd fine to pay for free medical
Everybody
care
else's.
and welfare and all these extra services and cash benefits for people who come into the country illegally. And it's just such a slap in the face. And the Democrats keep saying, well, how can we keep losing support of the working class? It's because you have contempt for, I'm a working class voter myself. You have contempt for us. You tell us how stupid we are every day and that we don't understand how great socialism is. And they run the free college scam every year on college campuses, and they say, oh, well, socialism means free stuff. It means you're going to get all this free stuff. And they've been running the free college scam for, 20 or 30
Oh, really?
years on college campuses, and they automatically get those college campuses every year with a free college scam. And these kids, they go in and they think they're going to get all this stuff for free, and then they realize too late they got screwed. And they get screwed again and again and again and again.
I think Bernie sent them all an outreach to say here,
Because every year, remember, every year they got another class of 18-year-olds coming in, and they're just like, oh yeah, free college. And so they start off with the free college, you're going to get all this stuff before the election, and then they're Marxist college professors that have 4 years of of indoctrinating these kids with all this left-wing advocacy. And, oh no, socialism doesn't mean like Venezuela or North Korea. It means a bunch of free stuff that you're going to get. And it's just,
The common theme is that we can say that, well, point to a place where socialism did work, and the common answer is, well, it hasn't been done correctly yet. They keep,
so as
and that's the problem. It has been done
100%
correctly.
failure rate.
It has been done correctly 1,000 times, and it's failed every time.
All
So,
15
in
of
any
the 15
form.
highest crime counties are run by Democrats. 85% of all homicides happen in Democrat-run jurisdictions. All 10 of the 10 highest tax states have Democrat legislatures. All 11 of the 11 highest per capita debt states, Democrat legislatures. Every high crime ghetto in America is run by Democrats, and every city, county, and state in the country that's on the verge of bankruptcy is run by Democrats.
Well, we have #1 in the country. It's
What's
Hartford.
that? Hartford, Connecticut?
Yep. #1. They read.
And
You must be proud.
then people are waking up
beautiful.
and finding out
And
that
that's
there's
all socialism done right.
sanctuary
That's exactly
cities.
what it's meant
well,
for.
If you ever get to travel around the world, you see all the socialist parties are just scam coalition parties, and it's always the same. There's the political class, and they steal and steal and steal everything they can for themselves,
It was absolutely.
and then they screw over the common
Right.
people.
Right.
The
That's
whole
it.
system is rich Democrats stealing from poor Democrats, and it's the same thing everywhere in the world. And I see the same pattern. It's the same billionaires like George Soros and whatnot. And they buy up the media, and then the media does the same thing. They put these socialist politicians in power, and very heavily one-sided news coverage. And then the voters get duped into socialism, and the socialists get in. They wreck the economy every single time. Every recession since the 1930s has started under Democrat.
Winston Churchill once said, if you don't vote Democrat up to the age of 30, you have no heart. And
Liberal.
if you still vote Liberal after 30, you have no brains. That's what he said.
Yeah, well, the
What
thing
a true
is,
statement, huh?
It's true.
yeah, the common denominator is our system is set up on the Judeo-Christian idea that men are fallible, and women. Sorry, nothing personal. Men and women are fallible, and that's why we have multiple branches of government as checks and balances on each other, because they knew that no matter what form of government they did, if they gave all that power to one branch of government, it would eventually be corrupt, and it would bleed the wealth of the nation into that system. And so it doesn't really matter necessarily that other countries are socialists. What really matters is that all that power is in the hands of just a few people, and they bleed the country dry. So even if you I'm not even going to say that. Socialism in and of itself is evil, because it basically, the whole premise is that Josh works his butt off, and then we all sit around all day and we get 20% of what he made because we don't feel like working, which I'm okay with that.
In these European countries, I talked to a kid from Denmark, and he said, and this is where they've had 150 years to tweak it and try to get, and this is just social democracy. It's not even full socialism. Right. They only have health insurance, and some aspects of transportation are socialized. But this kid tells me he likes how pragmatic a lot of the elected officials are and how well things turn out, the quality of life. Except he makes $2,500 a month. But taxes eat up $1,000 a month, so he gets $1,500 a month if he works full time. All these welfare moochers who abuse the system there in Denmark, they get about $1,000 a month in cash, benefits, housing, and so forth. So he figured out that if he mooched off the system versus working, he's only making about $2 an hour. Well, that $2 an hour basically only pays for his commute time and travel costs and whatnot. So he's literally making nothing. So it's mediocrity if you work 40, 50 hours a week, mediocrity if you do nothing, and eventually everyone just figures out, hey, let's just do nothing. We'll all just mooch off the welfare system, and we'll all just end up equally broke.
That is the result of socialism every time.
If you don't produce anything.
It may not start that way, but that's the way it ends every
to
time.
Socialists every single time. If you have a society where you don't produce anything, if you're not producing goods and services, then you have mass shortages of everything. And they don't understand everywhere around the world where you've got rolling brownouts, rolling blackouts, shortages of food, clothing, shelter, housing, doctors, parking spaces, apartments, everything. You've got shortages of everything. It's because nobody's working. So it's bad enough that you have all these industries that are now run, controlled, micromanaged by the government, and they're being micromanaged to death. But it's much, much worse that nobody wants to work, because why would you want to work? Why would you want to move up? Why would you want to get a trade? Why would you want to learn anything useful if you're going to get mediocrity no matter what?
Socialism, to me, an example, a great example is you're in high school. You get through the first semester, you've worked your butt off, and the teacher says, look, there's some of the kids in here who can't really work as hard or have learning disabilities. So what we're going to do is take all the grades we have and add them up and then divide it by the number of children. So as of today, everybody gets a B. Everybody gets 80%. And we like to thank the people that worked hard and stuff like that. Now the kid that's been smoking pot all weekend and playing video games instead of working, who was going to get an F, is pretty psyched. He just got a B for doing nothing.
And then everybody does no studying, and then everybody goes down to a C minus, and then a D and F level. But hey, if everybody's getting a B minus, no matter what how much you study, or if you don't study at all.
No, the premise is that the next semester, the kid that was doing the A realizes there's really no point working hard, because no matter what I do, I'm only getting a B. And the kid that was smoking pot all weekend says, wow, this is pretty great. So he's still getting high. The next semester, everybody gets a C. Then the next semester, it's a D. By the end of the year, right, those kids are all getting Fs.
Let's start all over next year.
Because there was no point working anymore, because you didn't benefit from your work. You did not benefit from the fruits of your labor.
They
So
don't keep
what was the
anybody
point?
back anymore, do they?
Huh?
They don't keep anybody back anymore.
I know, but I'm just making an example.
I know.
Hey, we only got like 2 minutes. Libby and Brian, thank you for coming over here from the Trump campaign. I guess you got to get back. What do you do? Like stay over there overnight?
They bring tents, and I got more friends coming from Missouri.
Oh, no way.
Another girl came from Washington. 5 a.m. Another front row Joe's coming from Buffalo.
Wow.
I have stayover places wherever I travel across the country. If I can go 500 miles, I got someone to stay with there. For the next 1,000 miles I go, I got someone there.
Wow,
That's
that's
it.
awesome.
Right.
Yep.
Max, thanks for hanging out with us. Josh, thanks for letting me become part of your family. It was a
All
big
right,
mistake
yeah,
on
yeah,
your part.
yeah, it probably was.
We'll see you guys tomorrow at the Trump rally, hopefully, and see you next week. Well, I won't see you next week. He'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week.